of the Torah. Maimonides was very controversial. Why was he controversial? He was controversial because A, he made God not to be a human being. How can you deal with a God that doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end, doesn't sleep and doesn't eat, and doesn't have any of our physical attributes? How can you say that man was created in God's likeness and image if God has nothing of these? Second thing is Maimonides' opinion about the world to come. The world to come is the world of the soul, the world of the intellect, understanding God, and how you get to that world to come. Maimonides believes very strongly that a human being not only is supposed to act piously, but that piety has to translate into understanding and feeling for the Creator. It's not enough to be pious. One has to use one's intellect and insight into understanding what God is about in order to become one with God. You don't become one with God with shaking a lulav. You shake the lulav in order to understand God better. And when you understand God better, that's when you have Olam Haba. Because Olam Haba is the understanding of God as a soul, and the soul is the intellect. And all of these matters are controversial. People thought of the soul as Casper the Friendly Ghost. People thought of the world to come as some kind of feast. Many people believe that there's going to be a resurrection and we're going to have an enjoyable feast that will last forever. Maimonides dispels that and goes against that. Maimonides has no use for things that are not long-lasting. And so, at one point, it appears that Maimonides says it will be no longer necessary to have sacrifices. Many of these concepts, and others as well, Maimonides in his Pursuit of Truth said that which is by divine revelation, by prophecy, you have to accept. That which is based upon intellect, you must understand. And it has to be true according to the microscope of intellectual pursuit. And the fact that the rabbis talked about certain things such as cures, what do you do with certain diseases, how do you relate to the planets, how do you relate to events that take place in this world, a lot of that is based upon logic and the science of the day. And since the science has changed, therefore the attitude has to change regarding many of these things. And this was Maimonides' approach with that. And you know what? That's one of the reasons why you can, in certain ways, in certain places, question Maimonides. Maimonides believed that anyone could have prophecy. Those who go to the standard text look in Rashi, and A, it can only be among Jews, and B, it can only be among Jews during the time the temple is here. Maimonides rejects that completely, outright. And he says that the divine wisdom is dependent upon man's actions and then God's choice, and does not give a time limit, and doesn't give a limit to a particular group of people. He says the reason why the Greeks couldn't do it, didn't have prophecies, because they didn't control their emotions and appetites. The reason why Jews today are not prophets is because after the temple was destroyed, we're sad, in a state of sadness. And without happiness, you can't have prophecy. Those are controversial things. We don't agree with Maimonides where he contradicts what it says in the Kabbalah. We believe that the world to come is in the physical body, as does Ramban, Nachmanides, primarily because the Ari and those who followed the Ari believed that the world of souls is only temporary, that God desires the body, the physical human body, for there to be communication between God and man, because the body is something that contradicts godliness, and to make the body a vessel for godliness. And that's a trick, and that's what God ultimately desires. And therefore we don't accept Maimonides in this particular point. Maimonides does not agree that there's such a thing as a demon. Many, many places in the Talmud talk about that. He says, well, that's one opinion. But if you looked at it, then that's an opinion that was widely held. Maimonides does not agree that there's such a thing. He thinks that demonology was just a figment of people's imagination, as is divination, fortune-telling. Ramban Nachmanides, on the other hand, says that this is actually considered a great wisdom, and he said you cannot deny that which is apparent. There were apparently people in his time that could foretell the future. There are people who can read you and tell you what you're all about, and tell you about your diseases, and tell you about past lives and relatives that are gone, and so on and so forth. There are people who have those gifts. And therefore, the fact that there are Gentiles who have those gifts, in contradiction to what Maimonides says, we do not have to deny that they have any powers. They may have powers. I know people who have powers. I know people who've told me they've seen Gentiles who have powers. This is not just a kibbutz and a bava maisa. These are things that people can testify to. And so, how are we supposed to react to that? The answer is, we react to it as anything else. Everything is dependent upon the reality, the truth of things. If something is true, then, and it's demonstrably true, then we accept it, because it does not negate what is stated in the Nevuah and the prophecies. In fact, the Torah says that there are people who had the ability to divine, the ability to alter things, the ability to engage in black magic. There were even Gentiles who engaged in prophecy. And so sometimes we will disagree with Maimonides because of modern day proofs, other commentaries, Hasidic doctrine, which is because the thoughts of the Jewish people develop. And so too does our ethic, and our sense of fairness, and our sense of justice, and our sense of love. Of course, it's all based upon the teachings of the previous generations, but every generation is given its avenue of insight. And if I can have one, or have had one of those avenues of insight, if it is true, and I share it with you, you will gain something. And if I'm wrong, you'll also gain by the fact that you will seek truth, and I may not have it, but you may be on the path for getting the truth. And that is the contribution of Rambam.